Chapter 40 Breaking Out of the Egg. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Feng Jiu's eyes were narrowed as she felt the biting chill from the pool's water and the pain from the multiple wounds on her body. But after the initial pain, came a feeling of soothing comfort, like a warm flow was softly passing over her weary body with gentle touches. Warm flow. She suddenly opened her eyes and looked at her body in the supposed to be chilly water. At that moment, she seemed to be able to detect a faint aura over the water's surface. Not mystical power, but pure and untainted spirit power. Looking at the pool that was emanating with faint traces of spirit power aura, she thought back to those burrowing gophers she had encountered previously. Was it due to the spirit power from this pool that had caused them to become so big and strong? But why would there be such pure and untainted spirit power aura in a place like this? As she fell deep in thought, the golden egg she had placed high up on the side of the pool suddenly shifted a little, and without any other warning, it began to roll towards the pool. Plum! The golden egg dropped into the water and it quickly sank under the surface. Caught by surprise and shock, her hand grabbed at the cosmos sack and dagger and she quickly dived down into the water. With her eyes open underwater, she could see the golden egg slowly and gradually sinking. But, she saw that as it got deeper down, the crystal clear water in the pool became dark and impenetrable by sight, looking like a bottomless pit filled with endless mysteries. She was worried that if it sank deeper, her breath would not hold out long enough, and she was also worried as she did not know what kind of things she would encounter if she went down deeper, hence, she increased her speed as she dived down. When she saw that she was getting nearer, she reached out her hand and grabbed at the egg, holding it close to her. And just as she was about to swim up towards the surface after securing the egg in her arm, she suddenly seemed to have spotted an algae-covered stone door further down into the dark dim depths. Although puzzled, she wasn't too curious at that moment as she couldn't hold her breath any much longer, and she immediately kicked and pushed with her arm and legs to push her speedily up. And at that moment, the stone door deep down in the pool suddenly creaked open. A tremendously strong suction came out from behind that door, just like a vortex from the bottom of the pool, that sucked all the water in towards the door, carrying her down together with it. Ugh! Caught within that tremendous suction within the water, she was not able to avoid getting herself spinning together with the whirlpool that had suddenly kicked up, and was sucked in through the door. But the immense pressure from the water and being caught in that fiercely swirling vortex made her suddenly feel her heart's blood surge into her chest, and she vomited it out through her mouth, with most of it falling squarely onto the golden egg she had clasped firmly in her arm. But before she saw the heart's blood that she coughed out being absorbed by the golden egg, everything suddenly turned black before her eyes and she lost consciousness. At that same moment, the golden egg began to emanate a faint golden glow. The complicated-looking runes on its shell that had disappeared surfaced once more, spreading out over the exterior of the shell together with the golden light. What was really beyond anyone's expectation was that the golden egg that had been approximately the size of 2 fists was suddenly gradually growing under the golden light. It was still clasped in Feng Jiu's arm, but it was now the size of a huge watermelon. And right between Feng Jiu's eyebrows, a scarlet-red rune of the fire phoenix appeared. And at the same time when that rune appeared, her body was suddenly bathed in a golden light, and the multitude of wounds upon her body were closing and healing at a speed visible to the eye. A loud crash resounded. Feng Jiu, who had been pulled in by that strong vortex, was thrown straight onto the ground, the water from the whirlpool splashing onto her body. The impact and the stinging pain woke her as she gradually regained her consciousness. As she slowly peered her eyes open, she was almost blinded by a bright golden light. Crack! The sound of a clear and crisp crack startled her, and she looked down at the golden egg that had rolled out from her grasp, which was now as big as a huge watermelon, with a long crack running down the side. Crack! The crack sounded again and another long zigzagged line appeared on the shell of the egg. And when she saw the 2 halves of the shell break open, she was suddenly stunned and rendered completely speechless. Chapter 41 Chubby Little Sacred Bios. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After the egg shell split open, what was revealed wasn't a tiny baby phoenix but was a tiny child who stuck all four of his limbs out straight, sprawled flat on the ground, with his naked little bottom sticking up. A faint golden glow imbued with dense spirit power aura swirled around his body, which gradually faded. He seemed like he had just woke up as he slightly raised his head and opened his eyes that were clear as water, bewildered and dazed as he stared at the equally naked Fengjiu. It was only moments later that he gave a reaction. The pair of jet black eyes stared and a pair of red glowing flames burned within them. He jumped up suddenly and stuck one hand against his pudgy waist and pointed out with his other stubby hand at Fengjiu on the ground, his childlike voice filled with impudent rage that one was unable to take seriously. "You! Woman! I am the ancient sacred phoenix. You! You had the audacity to visualize my godly image into a little bumbling human toddler. Although he will be able to morph into human form after he matures, but, he had never for one moment thought that he will turn straight into a human toddler right after breaking out of his shell. He is the little fire phoenix. Little fire phoenix. Due to the contract, the contracted owner's imagination of his image would directly impact whether he would be born in the form of a beast or human. But, if he was born in human form, he would have to wait till he fully matures before he could morph into his original fire phoenix form. Heavens know how long it will be before he matures. And before he grows up, he will have to parade around in this little snot-nosed human form throughout it all. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got, and the more depressed he became. He wanted to cry, but he did not want to let the woman see that, so he could only stare intensely at the culprit behind all of this. Fengjiu was shocked into speechless amazement. Did a child really just hatched out of that egg? Bedodem, come on. She had only just imagined it once when she picked up that egg, on what the phoenix would look like when it hatched out of the egg. She had just unconsciously thought of an adorable plump little kid then a brief moment. Seeing the little bumbling toddler standing there with a hand stuck upon his fleshy hip, the other pointing angrily at her, fully exposing his naked little body and the little elephant's trunk waving before her. In a moment of itch in her hands, she coiled up her finger and thumb in one hand and flicked the tiny elephant's trunk. Arg! You! What are you doing? A certain proud little fire phoenix was finally aware of his own nakedness, and when he was suddenly teased down below, the shock made him feel both humiliated and angry, whereby he quickly backpedaled a few steps quickly and covered himself with his stubby hands. You shameless woman! He shouted out angrily in humiliation, his face blushing a deep red, his childlike voice not really giving his rage the impact that was intended. At that moment, he seemed to only realize then of the woman's bare body, and he quickly released one of the two hands protecting his modesty below to cover over his eyes and turning his body away. You are not wearing any clothes. This time, even his ears were turning as red as his face. Fengjiu glanced at the small little boy who was showing such exaggerated reactions, and she continued to tease mercilessly. I can see you rounded little buttocks behind. Arg! You are truly a shameless woman. Shameless. Shameless. He was feeling completely helpless, but he did not know any other words to curse, so all he could do was to keep repeating the word shameless. Fengjiu was feeling tickled and she could not help it but to laugh aloud. At the same time, she looked down at herself and suddenly realized that the wounds that was all over her body had completely healed. Her deep eyes glinted with a trace of query and her gaze turned slightly, to look thoughtfully at the little fire phoenix who had changed the position of his hands to cover over his tiny buttocks. Was it because of this little fellow? She took out some strips of cloth from the cosmos sack to tie them securely around her chest and then pulled out a suit of men's clothes to slip onto herself. After putting on the belt, she reached a hand out in a cradle and carried up the stark naked little fellow. Arg! What? What is this woman thinking of doing? Finding himself suddenly being carried up, he cried out in shock, both his hands covering up below, and he stared warily at the woman. Chapter 42 Secret Underwater Palace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Who would have known, but Feng retrieved from the cosmos sack a set of clothes and with her dagger, she altered it slightly and slipped it over the little fellow's tiny body. Make do with it, when we get out, we'll then get you a little red bib as undergarments. She said through narrowed eyes, and she gave him a little smack on his fleshy buttocks. It's done. She turned him around and looked at the fuming and indignant face, finding it rather amusing. A revered individual like me would never wear something like that, he said with a pout, feeling rather annoyed with the woman who was taking shameless liberties with his body. I had thought that after the egg hatched, a phoenix would appear, and not a little bumbling kid. Sigh, would you then be able to transform into your original phoenix form? She then asked curiously. If only she had not brought it up. At the mention of it, the proud little fire phoenix flew into a proper rage. You still have the cheek to bring that up. As a highly revered ancient sacred beast, the fact that I have been born in the form of a human is fully and entirely your fault. Feng Jiu rubbed at her nose consciously. How would I know that a moment's wild imagination would come true just like this? Humph. He gave a big snort and crossed his pudgy arms before his chest and turned his face away from her in an angry tantrum. Feng Jiu laughed aloud, unconcerned. She then stood up and surveyed their surroundings with a glance around. Who would have thought that beneath that deep pool, such a place would actually exist? When she recalled the force of that tremendous vortex that had sucked her into here, her brows creased up together. I really do not know how a woman like you could become my contract owner. You're ugly, lacking in power, and like to touch people's buttocks. You're just one lustful woman. The little phoenix had the egg shells in his arms at that moment and he was chomping on them crunchily as he grumbled, occasionally throwing Feng Jiu a begrudging glance. Feng Jiu was laughing at his incessant grumbles and she reached out her hand to flick at him on the forehead saying, Little fella, doesn't matter if you are willing, but you already belong to me. So you just stick by me from now on. As she spoke, her eyes looked at him in puzzlement. One more thing. Are you really that hungry? Are those eggshells even edible? The little fire phoenix rolled his eyes at her and turned his head away proudly, completely ignoring her. His eggshells were great stuff and eating them will not only increase his powers, they will also provide great nutrition for his body. That woman does not know anything and is just a fool. Alright, let us go. Let's go see what kind of amazing things this place hides that could give out such a tremendous force to suck us in here. Feng Jiu said as she lifted her foot to make her way forward. It could be seen that it was a hidden palace abandoned for many years and who knew why such a secret palace would end up being submerged under such a deep pool. The little fire phoenix cradled his egg shells and continued to chomp on them as he followed behind Feng Jiu, throwing occasionally glances at the figures back in front of him, thinking that the woman was rather strange. She possessed weak powers, but she was somehow neither afraid nor panicking when caught in a strange place such as this. I waited for so many years, and after such a long wait, a human has finally come. The heavens have not given up on me, not given up, ha 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 ha. Suddenly, from within the secret palace, a deep timbred voice sounding wildly arrogant boomed out, and carried here together with that voice was a powerful oppressive aura that swirled in the air accompanying the booming voice. What was strange though, even when those waves of powerful oppressive aura that were even visible to the naked eye swirled in the air before her, she did not feel the slightest discomfort coming from it. Was it because she was contracted with an ancient sacred beast, the fire phoenix? When that thought came into her mind, she could not help but turn back and glanced at the little fellow crunching on the eggshells behind her. And thought to herself. The little pipsqueak didn't look at all like he would be so useful. Chapter 43 Body of a Mystical Spy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Why are you staring at my divine self again? The little fellow asked staring at her. Feng Jiu smiled and suddenly turned to reach out her hand to pinch the tiny figure's pink and fleshy cheeks saying. I am growing to like you more and more, what am I to do? Hearing those words, the little fire phoenix's eyes widened in surprise, his face with its exquisite features turning a bright red. He tried hard to put on an angry front, but his eyes were somewhat coy, the expression on his face a mix of shyness and awkwardness. You don't think just by saying these things, my divine self will look at you in a different light. You are just a fool. My divine self will never like you, and one more thing, do not keep being so touchy-feely, it's so indecent and not bit like what a woman should be doing. After finishing what he wanted to say, he turned his eyes away proudly, refusing to look at her. Feng Jiu smiled at him, feeling that the shy and coy little toddler was just too adorable. Little lass, come here and let me take a good look at you. The booming and arrogant voice resounded once again, and this time, when the voice reached them, it was accompanied by a suction force that sucked in Feng Jiu's entire body further inside. Foolish woman. Having just finished the eggshells and he was just wiping his hands off when he saw Feng Jiu being sucked in by a force whereby he gave out a worried scream and hurried to follow her inside. Feng Jiu felt herself immobilized and she could not even scream, seemingly like it had just been a blink before she had been sucked inside, to come before a set of skeleton. The next moment, a stream of power invaded into her meridians, and under the invading power, she felt as if she was fully exposed, in pure nakedness under the sun's rays, unable to hide any secrets at all. And when the little fire phoenix caught up, he banged into a boundary barrier, isolated and kept out, unable to get near to Feng Jiu on the inside. Seeing her standing completely motionless and unmoving before the skeleton, the little fire phoenix panicked and shouted loudly. Foolish woman! Foolish woman! How are you feeling? A mystical spirit body. It's actually a mystical spirit body. Ha 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 ha. Such an extremely rare mystical spirit body that is seldom seen once every millennium, and it has fallen right before me, Chu Ba Tian. Ha ha ha. Heaven has truly not given up on me. Not given up on me. Ha 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 ha. Feng Jiu could only hear that excited and agitated voice laughing out maniacally. The power that restrained her suddenly retracted. Feng Jiu fell to the ground sitting weakly, all her strength drained out of her, looking directly at the skeleton before her. As she had not detected any killing intent, nor any maliciousness from the entity, but just that agitated excitement from his voice, Feng Jiu wasn't really feeling too worried, and she turned to the little fire phoenix outside the boundary barrier to say, I'm fine, don't worry. The two of them were after all contracted through their souls, and after the little fire phoenix calmed down, he was able to feel through the link that she was perfectly fine, and he immediately humphed and retorted awkwardly. Who is worried about you? But his eyes were still involuntarily glancing in through the barrier inside, to check on her condition. Knowing that the little fire phoenix did not mean what he was saying, Feng Jiu was not concerned about him but was focusing her attention on the skeleton before her, testing the waters by saying, Senior. At that same moment, the skeleton projected an image out from him. It showed a middle-aged man dressed in black robes. As the image appeared in the air, his sharp and oppression-filled gaze looking down at Feng Jiu below him. To possess a mystical spirit body, little girl, you're no simpleton. Not only did she possess the so rarely encountered mystical spirit body, she was also the contracted owner of a divine sacred beast, the fire phoenix. In what way would a girl like this be possibly ordinary? The heavens were being kind. At the moment just before the last of his blood's essence was about to completely be dispersed, they had sent such an incredibly prodigious cultivator, that would allow him to bequeath his wishes and carry it on. Chapter 44 He Who Once Reigned Supreme. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mystical Spirit Body. Feng Jiu asked quizzically of the ghostly image, and continued to ask another question. Mystical spirit bodies are rarely seen. Forgiving her for having not come to this world for long, and for having a great lack in knowledge towards cultivation, the term mystical spirit body was something that she had never heard of. A mystical spirit body is the epitome of the most prodigious cultivators. Not only can they cultivate mystical powers, they are also able to cultivate spirit powers as well, and the speed that they can progress at is 10 times that of others. The middle-aged man saw her show a smile on her face and he went on to say. In other words, for others who will need a whole decade to become a mystical power martial pugilist, for you, it might only take you merely a year to achieve the same rank. Such speed that can be achieved in your cultivation, can be termed as prodigiously talented. Hearing those words, Feng Jiu considered it a moment and said. That doesn't sound right. I have tried to cultivate by drawing the energies into my body, but I had not felt any significant difference to my body, and definitely nothing like what Senior is saying about the speedy progress I can achieve in cultivation in my experience. She had used quite a long period of time to draw in the qi into her body, and the amount of mystical powers in her body after cultivation was really nothing to speak of at all. That is because the mystical and spirit qi meridians within you are not opened. His gaze burned into Feng Jiu as he stared. I wish for you to pay obeisance to me as your master. In that instance, I will help you open up your mystical and spirit meridians to aid you with your cultivation. If it was anyone else, upon hearing such a powerful entity offering to accept one as a disciple, it would be thought that it would be accepted without hesitation. But when Feng Jiu heard those words, her brows instead creased up together in a frown and her eyes showed she was deep in thought as she stared at the middle-aged man without saying a single word. You are unwilling. Seeing Feng Jiu not showing any signs of joy or delight, the man frowned and he pushed his oppressive aura to flare out more strongly and then noticed that his aura had not much of an effect on the person who had been contracted with an ancient sacred beast. He then immediately gave up on that and gave out a long sigh instead. You do not have to worry that I have any ulterior motives. I only wish for you to help me complete 3 tasks after accepting to become my pupil. Hearing that, Feng Jiu thought on it another moment before she finally said. Why don't Senior tell me about it first, and if it is within my powers, and does not go against my style of doing things, I might just be able to agree to it. The middle-aged man laughed out heartily when he heard that and said. Great. I can see that you are one that does things as you please, and it is rather similar to my own temperament. Feng Jiu smiled at him but did not reply. Girl, I was originally the ruler of the Heavenly Dynasty Palace, Chu Ba Tian. At the peak of my glory, no one dared go against me. I lived my life by the sword and willfully dominated the world under the heavens. As long as I deemed something to be right, I will definitely carry it out to the end. That year. He told Feng Jiu of his past life in detail. Feng Jiu listened attentively, and from his words, it was gathered that he was a willful man that followed whatever his heart told him. But as he was too uninhibited and unpredictable, he was viewed as unorthodox and evil by the conventional sects of immortality. He had a mighty sword that cut through metals like mud called the Blue Edge. An immortal from an orthodox sect coveted his blue-edged sword and wrongly accused him of having massacred a mortal's village, which caused him to be persecuted by powerful pugilists from all sides. With his attainment as a venerable martial emperor, he did not fear all those cultivators of immortality whose powers were inferior to his. However, they had captured his own people as hostages to threaten him, resulting in him sustaining grave injuries to escape to this place, to finally succumb and die here. For so many long years, he had waited here patiently, for the destined one to come, and take on his mantle, to reinstate the Heavenly Dynasty Palace, and fulfill his last wishes. The first wish is to reinstate the Heavenly Dynasty Palace, so what are the second and third wished? The second wish is to break into the Thousand Swords tomb to retrieve the Blue Edge. As for the third. His voice hesitated a while and he gave a sigh. I had been too willful and reckless in those years, and I brought calamity upon my family. It was especially so for my wife, who was coincidentally in labor at that time. So many years have passed and I wonder how they are doing. I would like you to go seek them out and see whether they are living on fine. Chapter 45 Mysterious Ring. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After hearing the demands out and not finding them overboard, Feng Jiu nodded her head and asked with a wide smile. Since I am to acknowledge you as my master, is Senior just merely going to open up the mystical and spirit channels in my meridians? If there were no tangible benefits, acknowledging a master just like this would be too disadvantageous to her. Ha ha ha, of course that's not all. The middle-aged man laughed out loud in a booming voice, the gaze fixed on Feng Jiu seemingly growing in admiration for the girl. After hearing that, Feng Jiu did not say much more but just knelt down, and bowed in acknowledgement of her master, saying, "My revered master, please accept your disciple, Feng Jiu's offer of obeisance." Upon finishing those words, she respectfully kowtowed, lowering her forehead to the ground with a thud. Good, good, good. Chu Ba Tian, finally has a disciple to inherit me. Ha 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 ha. He laughed out loud excitedly and said, "Girl, remove the third brick on the left of my skeleton remains. Behind it, you will find something your master would like to gift to you." "Sure." Feng Jiu agreed, and she went and knocked on the third brick as she was told. Finding that it sounded rather hollow, she pulled out her dagger to pry the brick out, and found a little wooden box behind which she quickly retrieved. "Master, why can't I open it?" The little wooden box didn't seem to be locked, but she just could not open it. "That had been sealed by your master, me, and ordinary people cannot open it." Chu Ba Tian said with a laugh, and with a wave of his hand, a ray of light ran over the box. "All right, take that thing out of the box now." Feng Jiu tried to open the box once more, half in doubt, but the box opened easily this time. Inside was just an inconspicuous ring, and it was even quite badly tarnished. Feng Jiu was speechless for a short moment before she said, "Master, this is the treasure you are talking about." She picked it up and lay a scrutinizing eye on it, but she still did not find anything extraordinary about it. "Haha, I really don't know from which hole you had crawled out from that you haven't even heard of a spatial ring." Chu Ba Tian shook his head as he laughed helplessly. "Do not underestimate this ring, it is not an ordinary spatial ring. Besides being able to store things, it is a world by itself within, and even living things can be placed inside. Moreover, when you place food in there, time stands still for it and they will not turn bad. It's that incredible. How did Master manage to get your hands on such an amazing treasure? This should be more priceless than the blue-edged sword, wouldn't it? With an item like this, why would people still covet after that blue-edged sword? I got this spatial ring entirely by chance, and your master had treated it just like an ordinary item without knowing it was a spatial ring. After all, it was impossible to see a spatial ring in a place like this, and it was after I was gravely injured and come to this place, and it was completely by chance that your master's blood dripped into the ring before I discovered that it was a spatial ring." When he spoke about this, his voice paused for a while before he continued. "As your master's life expired, the ring's sacred contract with my soul was broken as well. You will only need to drip a drop of your blood on it for it to recognize you as its owner, which will allow you to gain entry into it. Inside it, I have left all my life's treasures and skill manuals that I have amassed, and they will be my gift to you. I can go inside this ring myself." Her eyes were sparkling brightly, filled with surprise and amazement as she thought to herself, "If that is true, in future whenever I am pursued and have nowhere else to run, couldn't I then just hide inside there?" Chu Ba Tian didn't know what she was thinking. If he knew, he would surely die once again in rage at seeing such a highly prized treasure to be used in such a manner just to escape pursuit, that was just too cowardly and undignified. The owner of the space can go into it, but there seems to be another separating boundary barrier within. When I went into the space previously, I was already nearing my end and I had not been able to inspect it clearly, but only found out that I could store even living things in there. As for any other uses it might have, you can slowly find them out for yourself in future." As he spoke, he turned to Feng Jiu and said, "Your master's last remaining bit of blood's essence is nearing its end. Come forward, my pupil, and let your master open the channels to your meridians for you." Chapter 46 To the Sword's Tomb. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Hearing those words, Feng Jiu raised her eyes to look at him. Seeing that the ghostly image was gradually fading, she walked up to him. She knew that the ghostly image hovering in mid-air before her eyes was the last vestiges of consciousness left within the blood's essence, and once the essence ran out, the consciousness and the man would forever disappear from the world. Stabilize your consciousness, calm your heart and quiet your chi. The process will be a little painful, but you have to bear with it. Chu Ba Tian said in a deep voice, and finally conveyed the last of his blood's essence to envelop over Feng Jiu. A ray of light visible to the eye surged over Feng Jiu's body, entering the channels of her meridians, opening them. Pain. Agonizing and excruciating pain. All the channels in her meridians were being forcibly expanded by a robust surge of qi flowing through them, from thin to large, stretching them to the extent they felt like they were almost going to explode. The agonizing pain caused her entire body to be bathed in cold sweat, more intolerable than having someone cutting your flesh with a knife. But she bit down hard on her teeth, refusing to utter a single sound, her hands clenched tightly into fists, blood dripping out from wounds on her palms where her nails had dug deep into. Outside the boundary barrier, the little fire phoenix saw the face that had turned completely white, and he began pacing worriedly. He wanted to shout out but was afraid that he might distract her, and so he could do nothing but watch Feng Jiu suffer under the excruciating pain of expanding the meridian channels. It was almost an hour past before the aura that enveloped her body faded away as she fell weakly onto the ground, gasping heavily for air. Seeing that, the little fire phoenix was suddenly hopping in nervous anxiety, shouting out. "Foolish woman! Are you all right?" Feng Jiu struggled against the weakness she was feeling in her body as she looked at the ghostly image to ask. "Master, how are you feeling?" "Your master is already person that has been dead for a long while, holding out my consciousness with my blood's essence in waiting all this time to finally gain you as my disciple to carry on my will. I have no more regrets." Chu Ba Tian looked at her and reminded. "Girl, before you become strong enough to protect yourself, remember to be subtle in your deeds and not let anyone know you possess a mystical spirit body, or you might just invite unnecessary persecution to yourself. The world for cultivators of immortality is merciless and cruel, and even as the most prodigious cultivator among them, remember that you must first be able to grow and progress." "Yes, master. I hear you." Feng Jiu nodded, a warmth suddenly passing through her heart. "Your master will not be able to guide you much in your cultivation. When you go back, diligently read up on the cultivation techniques I have left behind in the spatial ring and get a great master in future to guide you further along. But do not forget, you must never drop your guard against anybody. Be always vigilant. The exceptional trait you possess in your body must never be revealed to another person." "Yes." Feng Jiu said with a smile. At that moment, she was finally acknowledging him as her master. "Being at the bottom of this deep underground pool, both of you will not be able to get out of here. The last thing I can do for you is to send you to the Thousand Swords tomb. After you find the blue-edged sword, do not expose it in front of people carelessly, or the blue-edged sword might draw onto you unnecessary trouble as well." He reminded once more. "Master, after getting to the Thousand Swords tomb, what do I need to do to find the blue-edged sword?" "The Thousand Swords tomb is the place people bury swords. But, every person who goes into the Thousand Swords tomb might not necessarily find a sword suitable for themselves. Swords possess their own spirit consciousness and they will pick their owners, just like the blue-edged sword would as well." His voice paused a moment at that point before he continued. "As you would have a tinge of my blood's essence on you, that essence will guide you to the blue-edged sword's location. But, whether you can gain the blue-edged sword's acknowledgement will depend on yourself. If you are unable to bring back the blue-edged sword this time round, you must make sure that you will bring it out from the Thousand Swords tomb in the future." "I will." Feng Jiu promised as she saw him dispel the boundary barrier with a wave of his hand, and little fire phoenix came running in on his short legs. And the next moment, she saw a spiral-looking thing appear in his hand, and with a final shout of, "Go forth!" the two figures found themselves sucked into the spiral. Chapter 47 Seeking the Blue-Edged Sword. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Feng Jiu regained her consciousness, she and the little fire phoenix were already in the sword's tomb. As far as the eye can see, swords were everywhere, and in the air, the sharp aura of the swords could be felt distinctly. She lowered her head and glanced once at the little guy tugging at the corner of her clothes before she opened her hand to reveal the inconspicuous ring she had held in her grip. She bit hard on her finger and dripped her blood onto it, and she saw the badly tarnished ring give a bright flash, and it suddenly became as good as new, but it, however, remained as inconspicuous as it had before the renewal. She put the finger onto her finger and it automatically conformed itself to her. She poured her consciousness inside the ring, and just as her master had said, there was a space inside that contained quite a heap of skill manuals and treasures. She probed deeper into the space and she found herself suddenly bounced right out of the space. She gathered back her consciousness and did not go back inside the ring, but to stare at the mountain of swords before her and sighed. I need to find the blue-edged sword from out of so many swords here. Looks like it is not going to be an easy task at all. Even if you are unable to find the blue-edged sword, you can still find others. There are quite a number of good swords in the sword's tomb. The little fire phoenix replied to her statement by reflex, and once he said those words, he suddenly seemed to have remembered something and he stared at her proudly to say, "Don't think too much into it. My esteemed self isn't really concerned with your affairs." I know. Feng Jiu said with a laugh, and held the little fleshy hand in hers before walking deeper into the place. Let's go. Since we are already here, let's roam around a little. 6 hours is the time we have. If we do not find a suitable sword within that time, we will be transported out of this place. We need to make full use of the time we have. With his hand held in hers, the little fire phoenix was a little shy as he went. Humph. However, he did not let go of her hand and allowed himself to be led inside. The swords surrounding them were emitting with their sharp aura, every single one of them lodged in the ground. Some of the swords' edge were already rusty, and after walking for quite a while, they still had not managed to sense the blue-edged sword's location, and Feng Jiu wanted to put her master's words to the test. Do the swords really choose their owners? She grabbed out at a sword nearby and tried to pull it out. However, the sword remained deeply lodged in the ground and would not budge even an inch. When she wanted to exert more strength to attempt another time, she suddenly felt a chilling aura bursting forth from the sword itself, and she quickly retracted her hand. Heh, that's quite amazing. Feng Jiu said in astonishment, her eyes sparkling with eager interest. What is so amazing about it? The swords in the sword's tomb have always done that. The little fire phoenix said in disdain, lifting his tiny head to stare at the foolish woman who was acting just like commoner, and continued on with a frown on his face. Are you really going to search through all of them? Hearing that, Feng Jiu was taken aback a moment and she asked. If not, then. The little fire phoenix's expression was one that said he expected as much, and his eyes were filled with contempt as he looked at her, saying, You are really dumb. Having been properly and completely despised, Feng Jiu was however really helpless. Who asked her to not know about any of this? Didn't that man leave you a slight trace of his blood essence? Close your eyes and try to release your senses and see if you can detect and trace of the blue-edged sword's aura around. That can work. The little fellow lifted his chin and he tried his best to sound wise by lowering his voice. The blue-edged sword is no ordinary sword, and moreover, you have a tinge of its previous owner's blood essence. Of course you will be able to sense its whereabouts. I'll give it a try. And she attempted it immediately. Feng Jiu closed her eyes and removed all other distracting thoughts from her head, but just to quietly feel the different auras within the sword's tomb. It was roughly half a burning incense stick's time later that she suddenly opened her eyes, surprise and delight sparkling in them. I found it. Over there. Having really sensed the aura of the blue-edged sword, she was highly elated in her heart. Chapter 48 Blue-Edged Sword Picks Its Owner. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She led the little fire phoenix to the place location where she had felt the blue-edged sword's aura being emitted from. It was a little hill top and it was filled with all kinds of swords stuck into the earth, with the blue-edged sword at the topmost point. At that moment, the sword itself was emitting a razor-sharp and cutting aura, its low hum from the cry of the sword reaching her consciousness, shocking her mind. That is the blue-edged sword. Her burning gaze stared at the sharp sword throwing out a cold glow at the top of the little hill, and she suddenly felt like the blood in her blood was surging into a boil. That kind of a feeling was rather intriguing. Wang! The sword's cry resounded in her ears. Standing at the bottom of the hill, she could see the blue-edged sword vibrating at the peak, its cries coming out from the sword itself, seemingly humming in excitement. The sword's aura emanating out from the sword was getting stronger and more intense until finally, the blue-edged sword pulled itself out from the ground with a whoosh, and started speeding down the hill straight towards her. The little fire phoenix was rather surprised when he saw that happen. Although he knew spirit swords were able to pick their own owners, but under circumstances like this where Feng Jiu did not even need to go to it and pull the sword out was very rarely seen to happen. His gaze was strange as he scrutinized Feng Jiu. The little fire phoenix still could not see what was so special about her. Whoosh! The long sword landed, its point stuck right into the ground, coming to rest right beside Feng Jiu's right hand. Feng Jiu reached out her hand and gripped the blue-edged sword. She felt a strong vibration coming out from the sword accompanied by a cry, driven straight into the core of her heart. She exerted her strength slightly and pulled out the sword. With a swoosh, the sword started to glow with a chilling light, and the badly tarnished sword had in the next instant shone with a smooth gleam, looking brand new like it had just come out from the forge. Seeing the entire blade glowing with a faint blue light, and the 3 Chinese characters carved into it shining with a chilly light, she could not help herself but to exclaim out loud. It's really a very good sword. She twisted the sword in her hand and executed a dazzling set of swordplay. She could see the bitingly chilly aura covering the blade slice through the air, its edge exceptionally sharp. Master wouldn't have expected this. That the blue-edged sword would choose me to be its owner. She said with a light laugh, and she put the blue-edged sword into the spatial ring. It was then that she realized that the 6 hours were still not up and they wouldn't be able to leave yet. We will not be able to leave this place for a while anyway, so why don't we find a place to sit down first? I will be able to use the time to see what kind of manuals there are in the spatial ring. She said while holding the little fire phoenix's hand in hers as they looked for a place where the sword's aura was not as intense to sit down. Just as she had just pulled out a book about hiding your presence and was flipping through it that she suddenly felt the little fellow's gaze was fixed intently upon her face. She looked up and turned to face him to ask with a smile. What's wrong? Having been caught while secretly staring, he hurriedly shifted his gaze and looked slightly embarrassed as his eyes looked this way and that but refused to look at her. However, he was unable to overcome the curiosity in his heart, and after hesitating for a while, he finally still opened his mouth to ask. Why are there so many scars on your face? With the question as a reminder, she suddenly remembered that after having been submerged into that pool, her face had been washed clean of the herbal juice she had on, and her badly scarred face was clearly revealed at that moment. She reached her hand up and felt her own face before saying. "A evil woman held a knife and cut up my face slit by slit." Her tone might have sounded somewhat indifferent, but suppressed deep within her eyes, was an unnoticed icy chill. The little fire phoenix frowned slightly when he heard that and asked. "Why didn't you fight back?" "I was too weak against her," she said through narrowed eyes, thinking to herself in her mind. She wasn't the owner of this body then. If she had been there, things wouldn't have fallen to such a sorry state. BDNVL.M, and you don't believe me when I said you were weak. But it's alright. As long as my revered self is powerful, it's good enough. My revered self will protect you in future. The little fellow straightened his back and put on a stern expression on his tiny face to say. You just tell me who was the one who cut up your face. My revered self will avenge you. Chapter 49 3 Times Must Be Destiny. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon hearing what the little fire phoenix said, Feng Jiu's eyes filled up with joy and reached out to pinch his pink little cheek and said, "Aren't you always the one saying how much you detest me? My revered self still detests you, but you belong to me after all. If it is my revered self bullying you, that will be fine. But I will not allow any other person to do that." The little fellow was highly indignant as he spoke, but a pity for that squeaky childlike voice as it could not deliver much of the impact intended. With this miniaturized body. She raised up an eyebrow and laughed lightly. "I think you will fall over with a slight push." Sensing that his power was being questioned, he stood up immediately and proclaimed loudly. "My revered self is the ancient sacred beast, the fire phoenix. Although I am still in my infancy now, but I have after all inherited the power of the ancients and possess great power." All right, then tell me. What is it that you know?" she said with a laugh, asking nonchalantly. He was after all just a kid that looked to be about 3 years old. So how strong could he be? Don't judge my revered self based on my outlook of being just a small child. My power is more powerful than that of a cultivator at the nascent soul stage. If not for that man's consciousness binding me back at the hidden palace previously, that boundary barrier would not have been able to stop my revered self. The short tiny figure stood there with his chin lifted, trying to portray a "I'm so powerful" look to Fengjiu, which caused her to be unable to suppress the corners of her mouth from lifting up, and she played along by looking at him with an adoring gaze. "You're actually so powerful." Of course. He was looking mighty proud of himself, his eyes showing his high spirits. "But no matter how powerful, you are still my contracted beast and I am still your owner." She said that with smiling eyes, which would remind the little fellow of the fact that he deliberately wanted so much to forget. As expected, she saw his entire body slump, deflated as he looked at her with sad and forlorn eyes. "Oh right. Do you want to go inside the spatial ring? If not, if a small tiny kid like you were to suddenly appear in the 9 entrapment woods, you will undoubtedly draw lots of attention to yourself. If those cultivators of immortality are to find out that you are the little fire phoenix, then we will be in big trouble." Her master had told her when he was about to send them over here, that when they came out of the sword's tomb, they would appear back within the 9 entrapment woods, as they had been deep below the ground of the 9 entrapment woods. He was able to bring them out of the deep underground, but not out of the 9 entrapment woods. The little fire phoenix had initially wanted to refuse, but when he heard those words she said at the end, he finally nodded his head, albeit very reluctantly. As she was really too weak, and although he was strong, drawing attention to them when they went out there would still be rather troublesome for them. Such a dear. After seeing him nod, Fengjiu carried him up and gave him a kiss, where she saw his face immediately turned a bright red, and his shy and embarrassed reactions made her can't help herself but to laugh out loud. Fengjiu reached into her consciousness and the little fire phoenix immediately went into the space within the ring. And after the 6 hours passed, a vortex appeared above the sword's tomb, and with a swoosh, she was sucked into it. "Ha! Where is this?" She looked around at the place she had just appeared in, seemingly still within the 9 entrapment woods. But there wasn't a single soul around, not even a beast could be seen. It was so quiet it was rather creepy. And, it was already night. Brr. So cold. She rubbed at her arms. She thought to herself as she walked in the woods. Wonder if that big oaf Guan Lin is still waiting for me there. After walking quite a distance, she suddenly heard the sounds of battle. Bedodem, a battle. Her eyes were puzzled and she immediately hid her aura as she walked towards the noise. When she reached, she hid behind a huge tree and peeked her head out slightly to see in front. When her eyes caught sight of the familiar figure, she froze involuntarily and blinked her eyes. That uncle. It's really him again. Including the last 2 times, meeting him again this time, made a grand total of the lucky 3. They were indeed destined to meet. In just a few short days, they had managed to meet 3 times. But, why does it look like something is not right with him?